Hi, today we're going to go into another real case. This is a real Canadian just like you who came to me for financial advice, and quite frankly, it's one of the most inspiring cases I've ever had the privilege to work on. And it's inspiring not because there's millions of dollars, which there's not, but because of the financial hardships and setbacks that this person had to overcome to get to this position. Let's get started. Whenever I meet somebody new, I need to understand who they are. And I start by understanding who they are financially. And I'll put that on the screen here. You can see this person has non-registered investments, TFSA investments, RRSP, and a modest non-indexed pension of about $1,000 per month starting at age 65. As a person, this is a single woman, divorced over 20 years, raised her two children almost 100% on her own, worked in a retail job, worked a second job to make sure that her kids had the extracurriculars that they were passionate about through their school years. Those kids are now old and out of the house. And this is why I find this so inspiring. This person was grinding away and was not handed anything. Not a single thing was handed to this person, and they're still in this financial position in their late 50s. And the question that she came to me with was, Chad, I cannot work to 65. This person works in a job that was relatively tough on their body. Can I retire at 60? And I love answering questions like that. Well, sometimes I love answering questions like that. Sometimes I dread it. But in this case, I loved answering this question, and I loved going through it with the client. And I'm going to go into not only the baseline, but my recommended scenario and lots of the numbers and the trades that I'm recommending that she makes. So let's go into this a little bit further. So the first step I always take is to establish a baseline projection. I take the black and white of who this person is financially, I bring it into my software, and I apply the lens of the average Canadian. The average Canadian doesn't necessarily have strategy behind why their withdrawals are coming from here or coming from there. The average Canadian probably is taking CPP as soon as it's available to them. So in the baseline projection, I have this woman taking CPP at 60. They're doing relatively balanced withdrawals from the different account types. And in her case, largely because of how modest her spending expectation is, which is around $3,000 per month in today's dollars, her baseline projection works pretty well. In fact, there's $185,000 that's projected to be left in her estate at the end, which is pretty great. $185,000 sounds great. It's not a ton of room for error when it comes to a 30, 40-year projection. So some spending adjustments here and there will have a pretty big impact on that. But overall, I think it's pretty fantastic, again, considering the financial setback that divorce is and being a single parent and working two jobs and all of those things. I still think it's pretty fantastic. From here, what I do is I bring my recommendations into the projection to see how much it actually impacts the estate, and does it impact it positively or does it impact it negatively? And that's how I know whether or not it makes sense to her particular situation. And I won't go super in depth on the rationale behind all my recommendations. That could be maybe a more in-depth video down the road. But my recommendations here included, and we're not limited to, delaying CPP if possible all the way to age 70, evaluating an OAS delay year by year once she turns 65, moving all of her investments to K4 because she was in a relatively high fee situation, and we could save her actually just a hair shy of 50% on fees by moving to our fee structure while improving her investments, in my opinion. And also looking at an RRSP meltdown, which is the trade I'm going to talk about a little bit later, because you're trading higher taxable income in early years for lower taxable income in later years and more flexibility. And so in the end, at the end of this projection, the estate projection goes from $155,000 all the way up to $405,000. That's more than a doubling. It's a $250,000 projected theoretical increase in the estate, which obviously sounds fantastic. So we need to go back and we need to look at a few different time periods through the actual retirement plan to see what are the trades this person is making and are they worth it. And so I want to go further into that. So I'm going to pull up a chart here and we're going to fill it in together to get a full idea of what the comparison is that I'm talking about. So let's look at the composition of her investments at age 75, for an example. In the baseline projection with, again, very little strategy behind withdrawals, CPP early, things of that nature, she has a non-registered investment of $0. She has a tax-free savings account of $58,700, and she has RSPs of $347,000 for a total of $406,000. Now, if we look at the recommended scenario, you can see there's been a massive shift, right? The non-registered, instead of being 0, is now 65,000. The TFSA, instead of being 58,000, is now 185. And the RRSP is down all the way to 0, which means that in my recommended scenario, I'm actually recommending a massive reduction in the number of assets that she has at this particular age, a reduction of $155,000. But wait, with me, there's always more to the story here, right? Because if I'm out of RSPs, that means my estate tax has plummeted. And in fact, in this case, based on current tax law and the way they're non-registered to be invested in this case, the tax has reduced at a potential estate of 75 from 138,000 in the baseline down all the way to 0, meaning that the net estate to her kids, if she happened to pass away here at 75, would only be a $16,000 reduction, despite the fact that the assets are down $155,000. This I find really fascinating, because if we stopped here and we looked at a $16,000 reduction to net estate, $155,000 reduction to investable assets, you'd think this plan was absolutely terrible. But we don't stop planning there. We plan for everything, right? Or we try our best to plan for everything. And the trade here is relying more on your RRSPs in your 60s allows this client to more easily delay her CPP to age 70. And if we bring that chart back up, that means there's going to be an increase of foundational income from $39,000 to $59,000 in the year that she turns 75. Just a reminder, foundational income sources are income sources that are reliable and not linked to a market. So this is a $20,000 increase to some of the most reliable income that most of us have access to. And let's take this even one step further, and I can go to how much money she would have needed in this particular year from her investments to allow her spending desires to be met from her financial picture. In the baseline, she needed over $20,000 from her investments, and in my recommended projection, she needed just over $500. What a massive reduction. And if you think about those two situations side by side and you fast forward to when you're 75, I can tell you with 100% certainty who in that year will be less stressed. It's the one who needs almost nothing from their investments to make their spending desires come true. This person is almost 100% covered by foundational income. That's a great feeling to have. Now, the argument that people often bring in against delaying CPP is, Chad, well, you're not thinking about the eventual estate. And I do think about that. That's not totally true. However, I believe that the trade still can make sense. Again, obviously at 75 it didn't. It was a reduction in the estate at that point. However, if you think about the fact that you will only need $500, or she will only need $500 from her investments versus $20,000, what do you think is going to happen to her investments in her 70s and 80s, and if she happens to live longer than that? They're probably going to grow because they have really nothing to do but grow. So now if we take that same chart and look at age 85, which is probably much more in line with life expectancy here, we can compare again. The baseline projection had 0 in non-registered, nearly 58,000 in TFSAs, and just over 254,000 in RSPs for a total of $312,000. The recommended scenario, which has been trading RSPs early for CPP later, has now recovered, and it's recovered in spades. You got 75,000 in the non-registered, You got 275,000 in the TFSA. You still have ZIP in the RRSP, which means that the estate tax bill drops from 90 down to 0, which means the net estate is now, instead of 220,000 projected, it's now $350,000. It's actually a $130,000 increase to her estate. So yes, when you make the argument to me that when I make the CPP delay recommendation, I'm not maximizing my client's estate projection, you are 100% accurate, in particular in the earlier part of the projection. But by the end, in your 80s, or if you happen to get into your 90s, in a lot of cases, and again, it's case by case, but in a lot of cases, that recommendation can actually increase the estate. So if you found this interesting and want to explore some of these principles within your financial plan, there'll be a link in the description down below that'll come directly to me. And until next time, keep planning.